subway platform. Authorities call it terrorism. The Trump administration adds that it's the result of chain migration in general and the visa lottery system specifically gone wrong. We'll talk with the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee later in the show. The final full day of campaigning in that acrimonious Alabama Senate election. We'll have coverage on the ground, team coverage, plus 2 exclusive reports on the so-called Trump dossier, a surprising twist on who was working on it and who was pitching it to the media. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. It could have been much worse, much worse, according to authorities. A 27-year-old terrorist wannabe from Bangladesh did more damage to himself than anyone else in a botched attack today in New York City. His homemade pipe bomb malfunctioned on a Manhattan subway platform in the middle of morning rush. And tonight, the Trump administration is connecting that man to the growing issue of chain migration, and specifically to the visa lottery system that they say allowed a family member in to begin with. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is outside the Port Authority tonight. Good evening, Rick.
Brett, law enforcement sources say it appears that this suspect acted alone and may have gathered at least some of the materials to make his pipe bomb from job sites where he was working as an electrician here in Manhattan. And just a short time ago, a high-ranking law enforcement official told me that, in fact, this suspect told investigators he did it for ISIS. A massive police response on the streets of New York City for a terror attack underground between the largest bus terminal in America and the busiest subway station in Manhattan. At 7:20 this morning in a pedestrian walkway below 42nd Street, authorities say the suspect, identified as Akayed Allah, detonated a device described as a low-tech pipe bomb attached to his body with Velcro and zip ties. It's unclear if the device exploded early. Allah was headed in the direction of Times Square. Allah was the only one to suffer serious injuries. 5 others had minor issues described as headaches and ringing in their ears. Allah is a 27-year-old Brooklyn resident who emigrated from Bangladesh on an F-43 family immigrant visa in February 2011. A lawful permanent resident who benefited from the extended family chain migration program, which between 2005 and 2015 allowed 9.3 million new immigrants to enter the U.S. because of close family ties, a practice the Trump administration has been critical of.
And so we know that the president's policy calls for an end to chain migration, which is what this individual came to the United States through. And if his policy had been in place, then that attacker would not have been allowed to come in the country.
The former livery cab driver reportedly told investigators the attack was revenge for U.S. strikes overseas. Authorities are now closely examining evidence.
This incident was captured on transit system video. A further review and interview of witnesses is underway. A thorough background investigation into Akayed Allah is being conducted by the Joint Terrorist Task Force.
Allah suffered lacerations and burns to his abdomen and hands and is now in custody in the hospital. Authorities are searching his home and other locations for possible clues as the city remains on high alert.
This is New York. The reality is that we are a target by many who would like to make a statement against democracy, against freedom. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor, and that makes us an international target.
Tonight, President Trump released a statement blaming a flawed system for allowing the suspect to enter the U.S., saying, quote, America must fix its lax immigration system, which allows far too many dangerous, inadequately vetted people to enter our country. Tonight, relief here in New York that the suspect is in custody, but concern, Brett, that the next time we may not be this lucky.
Rick Leventhal outside the Port Authority tonight. Rick, thank you. Coming up shortly, I'll talk with House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Michael McCaul about today's attack and the issue of chain migration and that lottery system. We are just hours away from the start of voting in Alabama's Senate special election. It's a contest that has been fueled by allegations of sexual misconduct against Roy Moore and supportive tweets from President Trump on his behalf. The latest Fox News poll out today has Democrat Doug Jones with a 10-point lead on Moore. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Peter Ducey's with the Doug Jones campaign in Birmingham. We begin, though, with correspondent Jonathan Seri with the Roy Moore campaign in Midland City. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Brett. As we speak, the Moore campaign is preparing for what they call a Drain the Swamp rally. It's part of a Get Out the Vote effort trying to rally social conservatives to the polls in an election that's becoming surprisingly competitive, in part because of the allegations against their candidate.
These allegations are completely false. I did not date underage women. I did not molest anyone.
Roy Moore's denials of sexual impropriety are nothing new, but the allegations continue to haunt his campaign. A Fox News poll shows 39% of likely Alabama voters believe the allegations against Moore, compared to 33% who think they're untrue, with 27% unsure.
It's concerning. I'll vote Republican just because I disagree with the Democratic platform. I'm concerned about Roy Moore and the things that he's accused of.
I'm actually still undecided. I'm probably leaning to vote for Roy Moore, but I'm really concerned about the allegations as well.
It's my first time voting, so I feel like there's a lot of pressure.
When broken down by gender, women favor Jones in the Fox News poll by 20 points.
Get out and vote for Roy Moore. His vote is our Republican Senate, and it's needed. We need Roy to help us with the Republican Senate.
The Moore campaign has sent out a robocall recorded by President Trump. Alabama's senior senator, Richard Shelby, says he agrees with the president's desire to keep the Senate seat in GOP hands, but his vote is for a Republican write-in candidate.
I didn't vote for the Democrat or advocate for the Democrat, but I couldn't vote for Roy Moore. The state of Alabama deserves better.
In a series of 4 tweets responding to this morning's pipe bomb explosion in New York City, Moore vowed to help implement President Trump's travel ban, saying this incident underscores the continued threats our nation faces from those who want nothing more than to destroy the freedoms we enjoy. And tonight's rally will be the second time Steve Bannon has joined Roy Moore on the campaign trail in the past week. Other than a few interviews, Moore has not held any major public events since last Tuesday. Brett?
Jonathan Serry in Midland City, Alabama tonight. Jonathan, thank you. Jones is getting some outside help tonight. Former President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden are both featured in robocalls, and the candidate is holding 3 events today. Correspondent Peter Ducey is in Birmingham tonight with the Jones campaign.
The fight to flip Alabama's Senate seat has become a game of hide and seek, as Democrat Doug Jones jumps on unconfirmed reports that Republican Roy Moore spent the weekend at the Army-Navy game in Philly.
Y'all have covered politics for a long time. When is the last time you've heard of a candidate for a statewide office leave the state?
Part of the last-minute Jones effort, campaign mail comparing Roy Moore to segregationist George Wallace, which the Moore campaign says is just an attempt to manipulate African-American voters. 30% of Jones backers either still have reservations about him or just support him because they dislike Roy Moore, according to a new Fox News poll. That means the Democratic candidate is relying on Republicans like the ones he hopes will follow Republican Senator Richard Shelby's lead and abandon Roy Moore for a write-in.
I think that the people of the state, they've elected Richard Shelby for 4 decades. They're going to listen to Richard Shelby.
Democrats are also lending last-minute support. President Obama and Vice President Biden recorded robocalls that are ringing phones statewide on election eve, and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker stumped with Jones over the weekend, telling a Birmingham crowd Alabama's reputation may suffer if Roy Moore wins.
Don't let anybody talk about Alabama, talk down to Alabama. And please, I'm from Jersey. I definitely don't want some people just singling out a few folks on the Jersey Shore TV show and thinking that's my entire state.
But Jones campaign chairman Giles Perkins isn't so sure the Democratic stars who have descended on the Yellowhammer state will matter much.
I don't think the outsiders make much difference. This is an Alabama race being decided by Alabama people. We generally don't like being told what to do, and we look forward to Alabamans electing Doug Jones.
So the big star at tonight's Jones rally won't be an outsider. Instead, it's going to be somebody born and raised just 10 miles away from here, former Auburn University basketball great Charles Barkley, known best in the NBA for his rebounds, hoping tonight for an assist. Brett?
Sir Charles. Peter Ducey, live in Alabama. Peter, thanks. The issue of sexual misconduct is also making headlines here in Washington. Several women who previously accused President Trump of inappropriate behavior before he was a candidate are calling for a congressional investigation. This comes as the president continues his open warfare with the media. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has details tonight.
This is very exciting and very important for our country.
In his only public appearance today, President Trump was focused on the stars, signing a new space directive he hopes will return Americans to the moon and one day onto Mars. But much of his attention in the past 2 days was focused on the media and some spectacular errors in reporting that news organizations have had to walk back. The president tweeting, quote, "Very little discussion of all the purposely false and defamatory stories put out this week by the fake news media. They are out of control. Correct reporting means nothing to them." The accusation that the media was purposely reporting false and defamatory stories and not simply making mistakes led to some heated moments in the daily White House briefing as the press secretary went on the attack.
I'm sorry, I'm not finished. There's a very big difference between making honest mistakes and purposefully misleading the American people, something that happens regularly. You can't say I'm not done. You cannot say that was completely fake, Sarah. You cannot say that it's an honest mistake when you're purposely putting out information that you know to be false, or when you're taking information that hasn't been validated, that hasn't been offered any credibility.
But the White House also found itself on defense after 4 women who had previously accused the president of inappropriate sexual behavior during the campaign came out again today. The women, part of a group of 16 who appear in a new video from activist filmmaker Robert Greenberg, called for a congressional investigation into their charges.
If they were willing to investigate Senator Franken, I think it's only fair that they do the same for Trump.
I have a new dream now, that this man will be held accountable for his actions, and that future generations of women can fulfill their dreams without worry of anyone treating them like they are less than because they're a woman.
The White House continues to insist that the accusations against the president are false and that the allegations have already been litigated, with voters having the final say.
The president has addressed these accusations directly and denied all of these allegations, and this took place long before he was elected to be president, and the people of this country had a decisive election, supported President Trump, and we feel like these allegations have been answered through that process.
The president's UN ambassador took a different tack, Nikki Haley saying the women should be heard.
I think any woman who has felt violated or felt mistreated in any way, they have every right to speak up.
And does the election mean that's a settled issue?
You know, that's for the people to decide. I know that he was elected, but, you know, women should always feel comfortable coming forward, and we should all be willing to listen to them.
In the middle of all of this, the president is making plans for his closing argument on tax reform, expected to give a speech from the Treasury Department next to the White House sometime on Wednesday afternoon, urging Republican members of Congress to haul tax reform across the finish line. At the same time, the president wants to try to get a spending bill agreement done, but White House officials concede he'll likely have to be content with another continuing resolution that will keep the government funded through the holidays and into the beginning of the new year. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the Pentagon is complying with a court order and making preparations for transgender people to enlist in the military beginning January 1st. President Trump wants transgenders to be banned from serving, but 2 federal courts have already ruled against that. Russian President Vladimir Putin made a surprise visit to Syria today, declaring victory against terrorists in that country's civil war and telling some of his own troops to go back home. However, correspondent Benjamin Hall tells us tonight there may be other motivations for Putin's trip.
A hug between friends, the embattled dictator and the man who saved his regime. Today, Putin became the first head of state to visit Syria since civil war broke out in 2011, claiming the lives of an estimated 400,000 people. During the unannounced visit to a Russian airbase, Putin declared victory against terrorists and ordered the withdrawal of Russian troops.
To the General Command, I give this order. Russia's military presence in Syria has come to an end. The motherland awaits you, friends. I thank you.
But many are skeptical, including the Pentagon. In fact, the Russians have been expanding their crucial naval base on the Mediterranean. President Assad also thanked Putin.
All this makes the whole world understand that these states are ready to fight against the Islamic State and against the virus of radical terrorism.
But it's been acknowledged by the State Department that the main targets of Russian forces were not ISIS, but moderate rebels. And analysts say Russia got involved for political gains.
Syria is an excellent example
that Russia rose up from its knees, that Russia is a great power again.
After Syria, Putin flew to Egypt to meet with President Sisi and signed a deal for a nuclear reactor. Last month, the Egyptians also agreed to allow Russian warplanes to use their military bases. And on his third trip of the day, Putin flew to Turkey, where he met with President Erdogan to discuss, they say, Syria and Jerusalem. A whirlwind tour of Muslim countries as Putin plays power broker. It's often been said that Russia is trying to fill the vacuum left by the perceived U.S. withdrawal from the Middle East. And now with the controversy over President Trump's Jerusalem decision, it seems Putin is once again trying to capitalize. Brett?
Benjamin Hall in London. Benjamin, thank you. Coming up, two stories you don't want to miss. Two exclusive reports on the Trump dossier and the Department of Justice. Also, the huge wildfires in California are burning furiously again tonight. Firefighters trying to battle back. The governor there says get used to it. That's next. The wildfire that has consumed nearly 400 square miles and destroyed more than 750 buildings is burning its way into the history books. Tens of thousands of people have fled their homes in California, and the state's governor says this is the new normal. Senior correspondent Adam Housley is in California tonight, where the blaze is churning west through the foothills.
As the winds died down and crews got a handle on several fires burning in Southern California, the week-old Thomas Fire north of Los Angeles raged on and is now the fifth largest in California's history. A flare-up on the western edge of the 360-square-mile blaze forced hundreds more to evacuate overnight as it threatened coastal communities near Santa Barbara.
I've never even imagined that this was going to ever happen to us, that this would come this close to us. And so many people have lost their homes all up and down the coast. It's frightening.
We're facing a new reality in the state where fires threaten people's lives, their property, their neighborhoods.
Over the weekend, California Governor Jerry Brown toured some of the devastation, the Democrat using the moment to focus on climate change and how Washington should spend tax money.
I hope the folks in Washington realize that as they're spending money, or helping others spend it by giving them various tax breaks, we need to invest in our firefighting capacity. We need to invest in our whole infrastructure.
While firefighters northeast of Los Angeles and near San Diego got fires under control, victims sifted through what's left of their homes.
We're looking for anything, jewelry, family memories, documents, anything that we could find. Unfortunately, it's just a bunch of ash and broken plates.
The Red Cross says it will be there to help all those affected.
We're entering the recovery phase now. We're trying to help the people who were affected by these fires get back on their feet. They're going through some of the hardest times they've ever gone through.
Brett, this is the first time we've seen it look this good in a week, despite the heavy smoke and the ash still in the air behind me, the fire coming down here. This is the last real active flank of this fire, threatening homes here in Carpinteria. But the winds have stayed away. They've been hammering it with helicopters all day. We've seen at least 4 C-130 drops in the last half hour, and the big DC-10 firefighting jet I see circling offshore. Brett.
Adam Housley live in Carpinteria tonight. Adam, thank you. Stocks were up today. The Dow gained 57 for another record close. This is the 66th record close this year. The S&P 500 finished ahead 8.5, also a record close today. The Nasdaq jumped 35. A United Nations expert on poverty and human rights met with hurricane victims today in Puerto Rico. It comes as complaints grow about the U.S. response to damage from Hurricane Maria. Dozens were killed and tens of thousands of homes destroyed. 10 of the island's 78 municipalities remain without power. Congress approved nearly $5 billion in aid for Puerto Rico, but local officials say they have not seen any of that money yet. Up next, Fox News exclusives on the Russia investigation and ties between the opposition research firm and the Justice Department. It is a story you don't want to miss. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 9 in the Twin Cities as Minnesota state lawmakers try to change the way sexual harassment claims are handled at the Capitol. New rules would include an expedited investigation process overall, confidentiality protections, and due process assurances. Fox 2 in San Francisco as city officials and union representatives from Oakland begin mediation. A strike by Oakland city workers has cut off many of Oakland's non-emergency services, such as Head Start programs, parking enforcement, and building inspections. And this is a live look at Phoenix from our affiliate Fox 10. The big story there tonight, Arizona's governor sets dates for elections to replace Congressman Trent Franks, who resigned last week after revealing he had discussed surrogacy with 2 female staffers, even offering them some $5 million. For that, the primary will be held in February, the general election in April. Franks represented an area of northern and western Phoenix suburbs. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Tonight, a pair of Fox News exclusives as we continue our coverage of the Russia collusion investigation, the Trump dossier, and the opposition research firm behind that. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has new information tonight on ties between the Justice Department and the people behind the Trump dossier, a connection that's really raising more questions tonight. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. New disclosures confirmed to Fox News by top investigators on the House Intelligence Committee show that the link between Fusion GPS, the firm behind that anti-Trump dossier, and a top Justice Department official ran deeper than previously known. Fox News was the first to tell you last week about the abrupt demotion on Wednesday of Bruce Ohr, the Associate Deputy Attorney General, who was stripped of that title and his 4th floor office at Main Justice amid an ongoing investigation into his contacts with the 2 leading figures in the controversy over the dossier, meetings that DOJ officials told Fox News Ohr had withheld from his superiors. House Intelligence Committee staff uncovered that Ohr met last year with both Christopher Steele, the former British spy who authored the dossier with input from Russian sources, and that Ohr also met last year with Glenn Simpson, the founder of Fusion GPS, the opposition research firm that paid Mr. Steele with funding from the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Now Fox News has confirmed that Nellie Ohr, an academic Russia expert and the wife of Bruce Ohr, worked for Fusion GPS last year. Indeed, was paid by the opposition research firm through the summer and fall of 2016. A timeline that places her on the company payroll around the time the dossier was funneled to the FBI, and perhaps up through the election, some 2 weeks after which her husband met secretly with Glenn Simpson. The House Intelligence Committee Chairman Nunes told Fox News in a statement today is looking into all facets of the connections between the Department of Justice and Fusion GPS, including Mr. Ohr, unquote. DOJ, which initially claimed that Bruce Ohr had been stripped of his top-line duties because he was holding down 2 jobs at DOJ, and that was, quote, unusual, today had no comment about the revelation that Mrs. Ohr worked for Fusion GPS last year. Brett.
James, quickly, and I know we don't have these answers as this investigation continues, but how is it that the top of this investigation, the people in the Department of Justice, could not have known that there was any of these ties for so long?
Yeah, that's what they've told us, and if that's the case, it wouldn't speak well for them. But it almost defies belief that Bruce Ohr, as he was meeting with the principals behind Fusion GPS, wasn't creating some kind of paper trail to alert folks to what he was up to. But we expect to learn more about all of this as the weeks unfold.
And we will follow it. James, thank you. The leading Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee made some of his most forward-leaning comments yet about the investigation, insisting that evidence that the Russians colluded with the Trump campaign may be circumstantial, but it's nevertheless, he said, damning. California Congressman Adam Schiff made that comment Sunday.
We do know this. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. And that is pretty damning, whether it is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of conspiracy or not.
Questions obviously remain about that shadowy back-channel handoff to Republican Senator John McCain of the unverified dossier prepared by former British MI6 spy Christopher Steele, who was, as you remember, working for Glenn Simpson's firm Fusion GPS. Tonight, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge talks with a former senior British diplomat who says he was right in the middle of all of it.
My mission was essentially to be a go-between and a messenger to tell the senator that such a dossier existed.
Fox News spoke to Sir Andrew Wood at the Halifax International Security Forum in Canada. As Britain's ambassador to Moscow from 1995 to 2000, Wood witnessed the end of Russian President Boris Yeltsin and the rise of Vladimir Putin. Just after the election in November 2016, Senator John McCain spoke at the same security conference. Wood says he was instructed by former British spy Christopher Steele to reach out to the senior Republican about the unverified Trump dossier.
Senator John McCain, a fine man.
Wood insists he never read the dossier that his good friend and longtime colleague prepared. It was commissioned by opposition research firm Fusion GPS and funded by the DNC and Clinton campaign.
August, he came to me to tell me what was in it and why it was important. He made it very clear that this was raw intelligence, but it needed putting in the proper context before we could judge it fully.
July and August are critical months in the Clinton email and Russia investigations. In July, then FBI Director James Comey recommended against prosecution for Clinton's mishandling of classified information.
We are expressing to justice our view that no charges are appropriate in this case.
And the same month, the FBI opened the Russia probe. In August, Wood says Steele briefed him on the dossier.
He'd already been in contact with the FBI, and he said there was corroborating evidence in the United States, from which I assumed he was working with an American company.
British court records obtained by Fox News show Steele was directed by Fusion GPS founder Glenn Simpson to push the research to 5 American media outlets.
I've never heard of Mr. Simpson. I have heard of Fusion as the name of the people that Chris was referring to when he referred to working with some people with a team in the United States.
3 weeks after Donald Trump won the presidential election at the Canadian Security Conference, the details were finalized for the dossier handoff to Senator McCain.
I think that,
along with the senator, Sir Andrew Wood, and McCain Institute staffer David J. Kramer attended the Canadian conference. British court records state McCain told Kramer to get a personal briefing from Steele outside of London and then return to Washington, D.C. Fusion GPS would provide Senator McCain with hard copies. In January, Senator McCain gave the dossier to the FBI that already had its own copy from Steele. The senator's office had no comment and referred Fox to a previous statement that said he could not judge its accuracy. Kramer has not responded to multiple requests for comment.
A year after the election here on Capitol Hill, some lawmakers complain it's roadblock after roadblock. They even accuse the FBI and Justice Department of slow-walking documents about the dossier, even though President Trump's political appointees are running both departments.
Did the FBI pay for a dossier on the president?
Questions about the dossier are something that are better taken up in separate settings.
In Washington, Catherine Herridge, Fox News.
Up next, I'll talk with House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Michael McCaul about today's terror attack in New York, chain migration, and the whole issue. Our top story at the bottom of the hour. A 27-year-old immigrant from Bangladesh is in custody tonight, accused of exploding a homemade bomb on a New York City subway platform. The suspect was the only person badly hurt. He is expected to recover. This incident brings new attention to one of the Trump administration's top issues, illegal immigration in general and chain migration in particular. Here to talk about all of that, House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Michael McCaul. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for having me.
You happen to be in New York today.
I was there this morning with a childhood cancer survivor, and then NYPD picked me up this morning and told me a bomb went off at the Port Authority near Times Square.
So since that time, what are we learning about this guy and about the threat?
Well, he was in the country 7 years, a lawful permanent resident, came in through chain immigration, chain migration. He went to Bangladesh last September, which I think from an investigative standpoint, we'll be looking at what he was doing over there. Obviously, an inspired ISIS event. I think he self-radicalized or possibly radicalized when he was in Bangladesh. Either way, set off a pipe bomb. Fortunately, there weren't any fatalities. But it reminds us that the threat's still there. As we crush the caliphate and defeated ISIS in Iraq and Syria, it reminds us, though, that they have ballooned elsewhere. They're ever present on the internet. They're also in Africa and the Philippines. And this threat's not going away.
I mean, this was not sophisticated. This guy failed in what he was doing. Yeah. But it just brings up the threat and the drive that some of these guys have.
It's almost, they become a little more desperate. And I think what concerns me going into the holiday season is they've advertised hitting Christmas markets in Berlin. And we saw the picture of saying we'll be in New York soon for Christmas. And that was put on their site 2 weeks ago, sort of prophesizing what they're going to do. So as we go into the Christmas holidays, I think you'll see ramped up security in places like New York. And so while it's been scaled down to 1-2-man operations and that sort of thing, I tell you, Brett, what concerns me the most is still the aviation threat, which is their crown jewel. And with this laptop explosive device, the ability of them to get that kind of device on an airplane and blow it up inbound into an airport like JFK.
And we are lacking when it comes to TSA's ability to track that or get that?
I think the disturbing, I had a hearing, the Inspector General found that TSA got a failing report card in terms of screening this kind of technology. So what I've asked the Secretary to do is deploy the latest technology available, which would be going like from an X-ray to an MRI, that could detect this explosive device so we don't have that threat.
All right, so a couple of things from your committee. Homegrown jihadist cases since 2013, 146 of these cases in 29 states. That does not include today. Since 2014, 131 persons have been charged under federal law in an ISIS-related case. And you see the breakdown here of those numbers. Take a listen to the FBI director and the head of DHS about the threat.
Terrorists hell-bent on striking us with IEDs, vehicles, guns, and knives. For example, as we speak, the Bureau has about 1,000 active ISIS investigations in all 50 states.
And the trend of homegrown violent extremism, such as we saw in New York City on Halloween, are alarming. The line between the home game and the away game is now blurred.
These are things that you have said on this very desk a number of times, and unfortunately we have you back for these events. This chain migration, the numbers are 141,000 from Bangladesh, and it's number 14 on the list of countries around the world with migrants coming to the U.S., even topping Canada. That's a big deal for this administration. Do you think it makes a difference up on Capitol Hill?
Well, it does. I've been working with the House Judiciary Committee on an interior enforcement bill with chain migration. My border security bill will be part of this package that we want to pass in the Congress. You know, we're also talking about the DACA piece, but I think we have to get a handle on who's coming into this country so we don't have threats like what happened this morning in New York. Also, social media. Looking at social media before we allow people to enter the United States has still not been effectively done. The FBI director, that was my hearing, actually, when he testified about all 1,000 investigations in all 50 states. We've stopped a lot of really bad things from happening. But the fact is...
Would people be surprised by what we've stopped?
Very much. And a lot of it's in the classified space. And I think they'd be proud of our intelligence officials, our FBI and Homeland Security, about the events that they have stopped. But they are still trying, and they're ever persistent. And
what's the thing that keeps you up at night?
I still worry about an IED attack, a small-scale active shooter event, a shopping mall, something at Times Square. But again, I think the crown jewel for them will be getting one of these laptop bombs onto an inbound flight from, say, Istanbul or Cairo into JFK Airport or, God forbid, Washington, and blowing it up over the skies.
Well, hopefully it doesn't happen as we head into the holiday season. And, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate you coming on all the time.
Thank you, Brett.
Next up, the panel on tomorrow's Senate election in Alabama.
I think he's viciously attacking me because he knows his values, his standards are not what the Alabama people find dear to them. He naturally wants to take down my character and lift himself up without addressing the issues like immigration, like health care, military readiness, taxes.
Roy Moore was not even in the state of Alabama over this weekend. It only goes to show that he cares more about his personal agenda than he does the people of Alabama, because his messages is not resonating with the folks in the state of Alabama.
Moore campaign wouldn't confirm that he was in Philadelphia. He's a West Point grad, may have been at the Army-Navy game, but we don't have confirmation of that. We do have confirmation of a new poll out today by Fox News in Alabama, and it was an eyebrow raiser for some, showing Doug Jones, the Democrat, up 10 points now. And you can see the shift from November, 8 points to 10 points now in our poll. Now, this is different than the Real Clear Politics average of polls, recent polls, and that has Roy Moore still holding an edge of 2.2%. As you go back into our poll, vote by party identification in Alabama. Again, out today, you see the Democrats holding strong with Jones at 90%, Republicans 81%. Independents is where the shift is in our poll. And again, it's a plus or minus 4.5 in this poll. Fox News believe the allegations against Moore. Do you? That was the question. And you can see all likely voters 39-33 and the different numbers with the GOP voters, but still unsure at 26%. So as we get ready for this Alabama race, let's start there and bring in our panel. Charles Hurd, opinion editor for the Washington Times. Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. And Charles Lane, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Okay, you look at these numbers, Charlie. What do you see?
Well, I think that in particular the Fox poll suggests that we really have no idea what is going on down there and how it's going to turn out. I think it's very interesting that the split between those who believe the stories and those who don't believe the stories and those who are not sure are almost, all within single digits of one another. And I think basically that probably bodes well for Roy Moore, because what it comes down to is people are going to say, well, all right, I don't know what to make of all this, so I'm going to vote on the politics. I'm going to vote on the issues. And if they vote on the issues, obviously Roy Moore walks away with it. If they vote on character, then he probably won't win.
You have, Katie, national figures obviously playing a role here. President Obama, Vice President Biden cutting calls for Jones, Charles Barkley now, and Cory Booker campaigning, obviously trying to gin up and get the African-American vote energized to get to the polls. The turnout question is really a big one.
Well, former President Obama is now involved in this campaign as well, urging people to get to the polls tomorrow night. And the truth is we won't know what happens until they do. But this is a big test for Republicans in a lot of ways. If Roy Moore wins, will the Senate decide that they're going to keep him out from being seated? And what precedent does that set in terms of how they move forward on that? What does that do long term to the GOP brand in them deciding that they know better than the voters for their state? But in terms of the turnout tomorrow, the 10% number on the undecided and the independent voters indicates to me that people are going to go in there and make their decision at the last minute at polling time, because they're just not sure yet who they're going to vote for.
Chuck.
Well, a couple thoughts occurred to me looking at those really interesting poll numbers. They must be picking up something like your Fox result over there in the Democratic internal polls, because they're sending all these big guns into the state. Not just the robocalls from the former president and vice president, but somebody like Cory Booker, who's thinking about running for president, probably will run for president, is staking his personal prestige on this race and hoping to claim credit for an upset by Doug Jones. So all that together tells me, Doug Jones has a real fighting chance. The second thing is that Richard Shelby's comment was so interesting.
Let me play that real quick from the weekend.
When it got to the 14-year-old story, that was enough for me. I said, I can't vote for Roy Moore. I'm not going to vote for the Democrat. I didn't vote for the Democrat or advocate for the Democrat, but I couldn't vote for Roy Moore. The state of Alabama deserves better.
Senior senator from Alabama.
Yeah, and as staunch a conservative as they come. And it occurred to me that the question may be, how many Richard Shelby think-alikes are there in Alabama? How many Republicans are going to just sit this one out? And not vote for Doug Jones necessarily, but not, go there with Roy Moore. And if there are a lot of them, well, that might help Jones too.
There's been a lot of talk about what happens if Roy Moore wins, whether he gets seated, how the Republicans deal with it, how it's affecting 2018 potentially. But what if you play it out the other way? What happens if Doug Jones wins and the Democrat wins and is seated? Does Doug Jones vote for tax reform? Does Doug Jones vote for things that any other Alabama Democrat may vote for, but maybe not this time?
I think on key things, Democrats will definitely keep him in line. He obviously, his record on a lot of things is more conservative But at the end of the day, one of the most important issues is going to be abortion, and he is not with conservatives on that.
I think he instantly becomes a vulnerable red state Democrat, just like the one, Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota or Claire McCaskill from.
In fact, this race would be up in 2 years.
Exactly. He'll have, and so he will be instantly, trying to walk that line. And if you're Mitch McConnell, thinking about your Senate, you'd have a lot more leverage over a guy like that than you're ever going to have.
And I think he'll be getting an invitation to the White House to sit down with President Trump to talk about some of the things that they have in common.
Yeah, I mean,
especially since Trump has so much vested in this race.
We spent a lot of time playing it out the other way. I just wanted to play it out that way if that poll holds. I want to play this soundbite, some of the president's accusers and the White House response.
I want to believe that as Americans we can put aside our political inclinations and admit that some things in fact do transcend politics, that we will hold Mr. Trump to the same standard as Harvey Weinstein and the other men who were held accountable for their reprehensible behavior.
They've investigated other Congress members, so I think it only stands fair that he be investigated as well.
The president has firsthand knowledge on what he did and didn't do. He can speak directly to those, and he has, and he's addressed them, and I don't have anything further to add.
Katie, you have the U.S. ambassador to the UN, a Trump administration official, saying that these allegations should be heard, these women should be heard. They came out today telling their stories again. Obviously, they were told prior to the campaign. The White House says they're holding the line against these accusers.
It's a problem for the White House. It was a tough briefing today for them to have to answer those questions, and they got asked about it from, I think, 3 or 4 different reporters. It's certainly not something that's going to go away, especially as Capitol Hill continues to grapple with dealing with this in an accountable, transparent fashion. However, she does have a point, Sarah Sanders, when she says these things are laid out on the table before the election. We had an election. They voted for President Donald Trump, and he is seated in the White House. Today, we've moved past it. And Democrats have pulled this over before, too. They elected Bill Clinton twice, and it's becoming more and more apparent to me that the sacrificial lamb of Al Franken getting taken out has actually just a way for them to be able to take the political high ground, despite not doing it for 3 decades, to be able to say that Donald Trump now also has to resign, as Senator Gillibrand said today.
Very quickly, I only have 30 seconds, but the fact that we have this story of this DOJ official's wife working for Fusion GPS on the Trump dossier, and we're just finding out about this, isn't this shocking?
It is. It reads like a John le Carre novel. You hear these things, there's no way it could possibly be true, and then you find out it is true. It's like everywhere you scratch, you find more swamp.
We're going to stay on all aspects of it. The allegations of collusion, the investigation by the special counsel, and what we're learning really day by day about how the DOJ is handling all of this. We're expected to hear from the Attorney General and the FBI Director tomorrow.